So Jesus says, repay to Caesar what belongs to Caesar, and to God what belongs to God. What's happening in this gospel is it's really the tragic story of a people who started off good and they got lost and forgot their identity. And that people is the Pharisees. The Pharisees are the descendants of the great freedom fighters of Israel, the Maccabees. You can read about them in the last part of the Bible. They're the ones that when the Greek army was coming and trying to force them to renounce their Jewishness, they resisted and they fought and died for that freedom. But as the time went on, they started to kind of turn inward, in a sense, get lost in the details, and they forgot who they were. And now here they are, plotting with the very kind of people that they were fighting against to begin with. The Herodians are the ones connected to King Herod, and they were the ones that were working with the Roman Empire to squash the people of Israel. And so the Pharisees originally were the ones who were fighting to have that freedom to live out their faith publicly. And now they have God himself coming to them, Jesus Christ, and they're so blind and they hate him so much that they're actually willing to work with the very people, not the Greek Empire, but now the Roman Empire, and in a sense say, well, we hate Jesus more, so we're going to work with the very ones that we were founded to fight against. Do you see? They're getting lost in their identity. And because of that, they enter into this hypocrisy. Hypocrisy means, it's a Greek term from theater, that you have a mask on, and what's on the outside that you're showing is actually very different than that's on the inside. And sadly, even in our particular day, we can struggle with this, especially in our political leadership. More and more, it becomes this kind of split personality of saying, I sort of promote something publicly, but privately I'm against it. And it's like, well, actually, that's the definition of hypocrisy. It's I have something on the outside that's totally different than on the inside. And Jesus is then seeing through the mask, and the mask is coming to Jesus in the sugar-coated venom. Notice what they say. They really want to kill Jesus, but they come and say, Teacher, we know that you're a truthful man, and that you teach the way of God in accordance with the truth. And you're not concerned with anyone's opinion, for you do not regard a person's status. See how nice they are? But underneath, they have all these knives ready to attack because they say this question in which they want to put him in an impossible solution. Is it lawful to pay the census tax to Caesar or not? If he says, yes, pay the census tax, then the Pharisees can go to their people and say, see, he's in league with Rome. He can't be the true Messiah. Stone him. But if he says, don't pay the census tax, then then the Pharisees go to the Romans and say, see, he's not promoting your rule, crucify him. And so they're putting them in an impossible situation, a catch-22. But Jesus doesn't play the game. He doesn't dance their tune. He says, why are you testing me, you hypocrites? I see exactly what you're doing. Instead, show me the coin that we pay the census tax with. They pull it up, and sure enough, there is an image of Caesar on that denarius, is what it's called. And then Jesus says, okay, give to Caesar whatever his image is on, but give to God whatever his image is on. So yes, by all means, pay that census tax. Help to support human flourishing in the community. But first, where is the image of God stamped? It's actually on us, and it's on every single human person. And so what that means is that in order for you to give the census tax to Caesar, you first have to give all of you, including that, to God. And this shows that everyone is ultimately the Lord's, including this person we hear about in the first reading, this king, this emperor of Persia. Cyrus is his name. Even him, the Lord is saying, I'm the Lord of time and history, and so I can move his heart. He doesn't even believe in me, but somehow he's moved to help the people of Israel when they were put into exile in Babylon to come back home. And not only that, but he says, I'm going to even pay to have them have all the materials so they can rebuild their temple. God can move that kind of heart that doesn't even know him. And so he's saying, yes, all of those who have my image, which is every single human person, they ultimately belong to me. I'm the Lord of time and providence. So we need to render to Caesar what belongs to Caesar, and to God what belongs to God. This brings up this whole question of how do we live our public life, because we're not supposed to be hypocrites, which means we're not supposed to live something publicly and privately and have them totally different. And this brings up the question of something that is right in the midst of the founding of our country, the separation of church and state, written by Thomas Jefferson. Now, what Thomas Jefferson actually said, and it would be worth reading the separation of church and state, because a lot of times we hear people talk about it, and it's used as a weapon to say, keep God out of the schools, keep God out of the public forum, don't talk about God. Even teachers sometimes where it's like, if they want to be able to share their faith, it's like, no, you can talk about, Easter Bunny, Santa Claus and stuff like that, but don't talk about the baby Jesus in the manger. If someone brings it up, then you can kind of have them talk about it. So the church separation of church and state in our modern day seems to take on this idea of keep them away from each other. But that wasn't what he's not a saint. No, Thomas Jefferson had many, many issues. I almost jumped into that. There's a St. Thomas, not a St. Thomas Jefferson. He got problems, but that's okay. You watch Hamilton sometime and you'll understand. But anyway, Thomas Jefferson, when he wrote and described this wall of separation between church and state, it was for two reasons. The first was to protect the state from any mandated, imposed forcing of saying, you have to believe this, or we're going to chop your hand off, or we're going to do something bad, or you're going to be fined. Well, we call that now Sharia law, and there's sometimes these different states that are saying, this is what we believe, and you don't have freedom in your conscience to say anything else. And the church would agree with that. If you read the Second Vatican Council, it talks about every single person is given by God an inalienable right of the freedom to exercise their right to worship freely, according to the dictates of conscience. But the other part, and this is the part that our world forgets, is that the state is not to infringe on a person of faith's ability to live out their faith in a public way. If you read the history, even from the origins of our country, believe it or not, there was actually a Bible that was published and printed by the U.S. Congress for use in the first public school system of the United States of America. Very interesting. If you go into the Capitol, you'll actually see a painting in which they're giving this to our country. Very interesting. Also, think about the way in which, if we are a human person, And faith is something that can't just be merely a private experience, but it's something that has to be lived out. It says here, shine like lights in the world as you hold on to the word of life. You have to share and you have to live differently when you've encountered him. And so, again, it doesn't mean taking a baseball bat and hitting someone if they don't agree with you. But it does mean being leaven in the world. And if you think of the way that the church and Christianity has actually influenced society, if there was no Christianity, we would have no hospital system like there is now. We would have no university system like there is now. We would have no understanding of the human person, because the person, that terminology comes from understanding who the Trinity is, and that's a whole nother homily. The dignity of women and a complementary equality comes from Christianity. Even the abolition of slavery, even though it took a long time for our culture to wake up, right from the gospel proclaimed, and even St. Paul in his letters, when that gospel proclamation started to become that time bomb that would erupt in the abolition of slavery movement, it was through Christianity that first proclaimed every person has a right and is a beloved son and daughter of God. So if Christianity was not allowed to live out its faith publicly, then all of those things would disappear, and we would live in a very, very different kind of world. So an instance of someone living out their faith publicly is St. John Paul II. St. John Paul II had no division of military force, but he went into his home country of Poland and he spoke these words. He says, "If the Son has set you free, then you are free indeed." And some of my brother Marians were young people in the square of Krakow during the time when St. John Paul II came into communist Poland. He spoke the word of the gospel, the dignity of the human person, and the importance of not kicking God out of the public forum, but allowing him to be present because he's the one that makes all things new. People started to discover a newfound freedom. And a couple months later, the solidarity movement that would then become something that would inevitably have the Soviet Union fall without a shot, it ultimately came first from John Paul II preaching and reminding people of who they are in Jesus Christ. That's the power of what proclaiming the good news can do. Imagine if he didn't do that. Imagine if he said, well, this is just my private experience here, and you guys can do whatever you want over there. Someone will speak publicly. And in that case, it was Lenin, Stalin, and all of those guys. So we have to look and say, our world is saying, keep silent and don't live your Christianity publicly. And yet, even Thomas Jefferson said, the state has no business allowing you to live and be leaven publicly within our world, because the world needs the goodness of the truth found in Jesus Christ. Again, it's not a domination saying we're going to violate your conscience, but it's a way of proposing what's good and beautiful in our world and saying, this is ultimately what our heart is looking for. And then there's that free reception of it. So we need to think about this in terms of all the different crises that are going on right now. The crisis of truth. Is there even truth? This is one of the things that's debated there. We know Jesus Christ is the way, the truth, and the life. The crisis of life. From conception until natural death, the dignity of the human person is something that can never be tampered with. The truth of marriage. In the beginning, God created them, male and female, and they image God together through the beautiful gift of marriage and family. All of these things, if Christianity wasn't there and speaking that out as leaven in the world, they'd all go away. And if you read the story of the Roman Empire, you'll see that it was not a piece of cake in those times before Christianity actually conquered it through love. So live your Christianity. The whole reason of the Mass When we say mass, it's a missile projectile is what misa actually means. So go forth, the mass is ended, you're being shot out into the community to be leaven within your society, privately and publicly, without the mask of hypocrisy.